Hello, dear listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, here this week joined by a special guest, Mike Damante. Mike, how's it going, man?
Good, man. I appreciate the opportunity to be on. I remember I'm trying to make this work for a while now, ever since I interviewed you for my book. You're in my book, True Believers.
Yeah, man, it honestly has been it's been quite a while trying to get this to happen. I'm happy it finally did. It's one of those things where like it's such weird what's the word, I guess, serendipity, although that's just a ridiculous word, but it's hilarious to find out, like, you know, we're two guys from Staten Island, New York, both into the same kind of music and into the same kind of things, and we're doing stuff in this field. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really a small world because, I mean, you know, we both grew up in Staten Island, which is a literal dump, and we've obviously moved on since then to become fully functioning, successful adults, which is impressive on our
I'm telling you, man, we made it out of our mom's basements. It's the we got out of the Staten Island curse. It's so funny when I first like started doing UFO stuff, you know, with the show and then with MUFON, I got a message actually from a guy that I used to be we used to like my band used to play, you know, punk rock shows and stuff around Staten Island and whatever. And a guy that was a singer in another one of the bands that was like, you know, our band was a ska band. It was pretty like not hardcore, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And this guy's fans were like, you know, the really hardcore of the punk kids and stuff. And he was like, oh shit, I love UFOs too, man. And I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. It's pretty funny. So Mike, why don't you quickly just tell listeners a little bit about your background?
So my professional background, I previously used to work at the Houston Chronicle / Hearst Media full-time, doing copy editing, web producing, writing, reporting, feature sports, working on the copy desk, the website, you name it. I basically did everything there. And then I transitioned into education after that. I still do some writing for the Chronicle. I do a little media blog for them. But in the past 7 years, I've been teaching journalism and English and creative writing here in Houston. And that's my kind of professional background. But I've been involved in this subject ever since I was a kid. I was really interested in it. And I think probably, I forgot when it was, but when I wrote my first book, which was about punk rock and UFOs, cryptozoology meets anarchy, that's when I really started to kind of dig deep into the subject, when I started doing my first book.
Yeah, man, it's super cool. So currently you have two books out there on the market. You got Punk Rock and UFOs, Cryptozoology Meets Anarchy, and then Punk Rock and UFOs, True Believers. Listeners, go check them out. They're really cool books. And it's just awesome too to like support. I don't know. I feel like UFOs feels like a subject where, I don't know if you get this feeling, but it seems like, you know, the same stories get retread all the time.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's like a million books out there about Roswell, and they all basically give the same story, but there's just a little bit of difference there. But I feel like you're actually producing some really unique stuff, which is great, right? And which is what originally drew me to wanting to have you on the show, right? Was the stuff that you had on punkrockandufos.com, your website, right?
Yeah, no, thank you. Absolutely. And that's something I wanted to do. I wanted to do something different. I didn't want to cover the same stuff everyone was covering. I wanted to do kind of more featurey things. Also, you know, in the Punk Rock UFOs True Believers, the book, one of the things that I investigated was who are these people who are into this? Because I thought this was fascinating. Because when I first started getting involved into it, I started to meet everyone who researched it, and they always had really good stories as well. So, you know, I thought part of the phenomenon is actually the people who investigated too. So that's something that's part of True Believers. And it's also something that's on the website. Every once in a while, I'll do a feature or bio on a researcher or someone involved in the field.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, the people involved in this are they're pretty interesting. Some of them are pretty interesting. You know, there's a little bit. It's something else. I mean, I don't know how many. Have you gone to like a MUFON meeting yet or anything like that, or have you just kind of been mostly, you know, what's the word, like conventions and stuff?
So honestly, I've been basically, in terms of researching, I've done a lot of my stuff, you know, over the phone, you know, interviewing one person. I haven't really done any festivals or MUFON meetings. You know, one of the reasons why I was gravitated towards interviewing you, because I was never a big MUFON guy. I was never a big fan of them. I thought it was cool how they were, they had to have their database and, there's an organization collecting work, but I just thought there was a lot of structural things that I thought that was kind of wrong with them.
Yeah.
And then you came in and you're kind of like a breath of fresh air. I was like, oh, this guy's legit. And then when you left, you obviously left for the right reasons, because I think I have my opinions on MUFON, not the researchers who work for them, but the organization as a whole. So I usually try to stay clear of those types of meetings. But I mean, I've interviewed people, been involved with it, people who go to those meetings, and I have respect for those people. It's just, I'd rather, for me, I just kind of do my best work when I'm kind of doing it on my own.
Sure. Yeah. No, man, I hear you. What's been really interesting actually has been with the MUFON stuff, right? People don't, it's part of the Bigelow story actually that we're covering obviously this month. Part of the story with Bigelow and with Pudoff and John Alexander and these people that would go on to do other things that people don't realize or maybe don't know because they haven't been involved in the field or looked into the history so much, right? Is all the scandals that surrounded one of the reasons that MUFON lost so many members in the 90s, in I should say the early 2000s, and then even today, was because of scandals like, say, the Carpenter affair, where Bigelow was buying, what was thought to be private information from abductees, given to psychiatrists, or not psychiatrists, but hypnotherapists, right? Therapists, that Bigelow and NIDS was buying those cases, right? And then the later scandals where, Bigelow was supposedly buying pieces of material that came from UFOs, buying cases again with the STAR team, right? That to me is a really fascinating part of this. And it's so interesting, the continuation of this scandals at groups like MUFON and even at these other groups where it just has, again, the players never change. They just kind of get moved around, interestingly. And it makes for some weird stuff, man. The UFO subject is just, I don't know. A lot of these people should have biographies written on them, in my opinion. Chief amongst them, Bigelow, because, he's had his finger in every single one of these pies. And it's like trying to get information on him. It's honestly been like trying to investigate a ghost. There's nothing out there besides the little scraps that you can pick up. There's a famous, I don't know if you've ever heard of the MIT conference that happened in 92, right? Which was a big UFO conference where, scientists and people got involved in whatever. Bigelow funded that entire thing. And in the book about the conference, his name is mentioned 2 times. It's like, he's the guy, he's the main guy that did it. How is he not mentioned more? And then, oh my God, it's so frustrating. Anyways, all right. We didn't want to just talk about Bigelow here. I want to hear what, in your opinion. So obviously we have differing opinions on To the Stars Academy.
Yes.
I would say that is an accurate assessment of that, right? From, my listeners get a lot of the, I don't know, more skeptical or more critical side, let's say. I don't know, more skeptical. I don't think that's accurate, because I think you have a skeptical eye for this stuff as well. But I wanted to give them a chance to hear the pro side too. You know what I mean? Because honestly, I don't know if it's really been articulated very well on any particular podcast before, or in any kind of format where, there's blogs and stuff and there are places that do this, but a lot of the fighting frankly seems to happen on Twitter.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, which is really good for conversation. It's just really good for discourse generally.
I mean, I get a kick out of even the arguments I'm not involved in. I get a kick out of reading, everyone else's too. So it's kind of like, when people, like when you're in high school, like when you're a kid, you see kids fight and you're like, ooh, I'm going to go watch, rather break it up. It's kind of like that same thing.
Right. Yeah, I know. And my wife now will, I'll be on my phone and she'll see me getting, my face will be, my ears will have steam coming from them. Right. And she's like, what are you doing? Are you messaging someone about aliens again? And I'm like, no, I'm not. I swear I'm not. Why don't you tell us, first off, how did you get interested in this subject in the first place? Did you have a weird experience?
So yeah, I did. I was interested before that. As a kid, I used to collect these Time Life books that my mom used to get for me because I used to love reading. And each month was like a new series. And every month was like something that was like, it bordered the line between reality and fiction. It was like strange places, unexplained phenomena, mythical creatures, UFOs.
Yup.
And to me, like, I was like, this is so cool. Like, this is like, everything that I was into at the time. Only, there was a hint of truth somewhere in there. So at a young age, I read those books, and I was really, super fascinated with the subject. And I had my own sighting in Houston. I saw some colored orbs, kind of going around, moving in these crazy ways. And not too long after that, that's when I started to research stuff myself and write my book. And I'm a firm believer that many people who study this topic, it stems from an experience, whether it's a sighting, an abduction, something. Most of us don't just, I'm not saying everyone, I'm just saying majority of people are usually interested in this because there's a spark.
Yeah, no, man, I 100% agree with you. Even my own interest, actually, it's funny. My own interest stems from an experience I had as a kid, or a couple experiences as a kid, that now I can actually attribute to a medical, kind of a medical issue. But weird experiences like this totally run in my family. I think that has more to do with the fact that, like, kind of like pug dogs, our airways don't seem to operate all that well. So, like sleep apnea runs in the family. But, it's interesting nonetheless. So when you first, I guess, so when you first heard about To the Stars Academy, right? I can tell you from my own experience. When I first heard about it, it was a couple of months before it became really big, before the New York Times story came out. And I heard about them because of MUFON, because I was with MUFON, and Jan, the head of MUFON, was meeting with Tom, and it seemed like we might be able to do something really cool. And I was like, oh my God, this group's doing something awesome. Let's try to get involved somehow. That would seem like a great idea or a great option to me. For you, how did you, I can only imagine you were excited when it first started.
Yeah, absolutely. I've obviously been a follower and a fan of Tom's music for years. I mean, Blink was kind of the band that, I kind of grew up on and got me into, punk rock and like the lifestyle. And, I don't mean to sound cheesy, but it was like kind of one of those like aha moments,
Sure.
So obviously I followed his career very closely before this. I've interviewed him before. I've met him a few times. He never remembers, but it's, whatever. No, so obviously, I followed his music, and someone who's followed his career and has interviewed him, I kind of know his perspective, kind of like, I kind of know the person he is. And I will say that he's not somebody who's out there to, fraud anyone or, his intentions are real. He's a good dude, and he's trying to, do what's best, in terms of this community. So I don't think anyone should ever doubt his integrity on it. Yeah, sometimes he says things he probably shouldn't. Absolutely. But I mean, he's not somebody you should doubt because people have been telling him for years, you shouldn't be doing this, this, and this. And he ends up doing them anyway. So I always just tell people, you also have to have faith and be patient because he's not somebody who gets something done in a quick time. Everything takes a while, even like his music.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny. I have the same feeling about Tom. I think Tom is in this for the right reasons. I've always thought that. I think he believes what he's saying, and I think that he's interested, and I think he really thinks that he's doing something good. And for me, the challenge was always the people around him. You know what I mean? It was always the inclusion of these people from the Bigelow NIDS team and, folks like that. Like if it was just Tom and Elizondo, I'd be totally on board with it. You know what I mean?
That's interesting because like most people have the opposite thing. Everyone's like, you know what I mean? Have the opposite viewpoint of view.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that comes from people not knowing the history.
Yeah.
Not knowing that UFO kind of history that exists there about those people, or like I don't know if you've ever heard of the Aviary, or the UFO Working Group, but that's like a long running storyline in the UFO mythos that they were involved, like Pudov and John Alexander and the other people on the NIDS team and what would eventually become the NIDS team were essentially involved in the Paul Benowitz affair, where they were being paid by the government to provide disinformation to the UFO community, right?
Yeah, no, I remember hearing that. I just didn't really buy into 100%, the validity of how Puthov being involved. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. Well, it's a crazy story. Like with all of this, right?
Yeah,
It's an
all that's
insane
crazy.
story. Yeah, it's all nutso, right? It's just so fascinating to me to think that there's kind of this. I don't know. For me, the stuff that's been interesting, to me, I always separate between the stuff that UFO, like the UFO mythology that exists, and then the people on the ground who actually have said that they've seen something.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? To me, it's important to separate those two things. It's just it's really interesting to me that these kind of competing mythologies start to exist, where on the one hand, you have people who are like, no, these have been good people their entire career doing this stuff who want to find the truth. And then on the other hand, there's a whole other group of people who think, no, these are black hats doing the wrong thing, providing disinformation. That's what they've done with their career. It's so odd that can happen in the same sphere, and it's also odd to me actually in a way that that divide seems to have happened along almost like age lines.
Yeah.
Right? You have you have younger people who, I think young people who are getting into this, on the whole, generally really like To the Stars Academy. And I think, frankly, it's because the old guard has had a chance this entire, they've had the subject for like 50 years, so it's like, yeah, hell yeah. If Tom wants to get involved, let's see what he can do. And on the other hand, you have the old guard who's like, who thinks, well, we've worked with those other people though, and we know that they can't be trusted. It's a really weird dichotomy going on right now.
Oh no, absolutely. And I definitely get the skepticism at first. I see that. Then the question is, what's different now? I just find, like, I made this point the other day, like, I find it hard to believe that Elizondo, Semi Van, Justice, all these guys would leave their high-profile jobs, high-paying jobs, the security associated with those, to just create this giant disinformation campaign and fraud people. I'm pretty sure that's not what they're doing. Regardless of their past, because like anyone who's in any of those positions that they previously had, I guarantee you there's some sketch stuff on their records.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, well, that's the other part of this too. A lot of it feels like people picking and choosing what parts of someone's resume or past to care about.
Yeah.
Right? Like with Putov, right? People who think that he is not a good actor in all of this will point to whatever, conspiracy theory stuff, the aviary, all that kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they won't point to, well, this is a guy whose entire career has been built on this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, who like started, put his name on the line at the very beginning of his career to do psychic research. So it's kind of a weird situation again. What do you think? Because now you've been involved in this field for a little while now. What do you think can be done to make that divide better, if anything?
Yeah, it's really hard because I was on Dave Scott's show about this, and we were talking about how his beef with them, and I agree to the extent is that they've really ignored a lot of the UFO community in the quote unquote alternative media. And I think they could do a better job of extending the olive branch. But I also it's kind of weird. It's like, there's this party going on, right? And all the cool kids are there. And you want to be invited to that party, and you're not. So, like, you could be old and jaded and be like, well, screw those guys. I'm going to do my own party. Or you say, you know what? What they're doing in that party, actually, there may be a reason why we're not included. Let's wait it out and see, rather than being bitter about it,
Yeah.
Like, it's like we would all love a piece of the pie. If they're doing everything that they say they're doing, we'd love for to have a play in it. Obviously, like you said, they talked to MUFON and they considered other before starting the academy, they considered all these routes, and they're going the routes they're going for whatever reason. I get people say, well, they're trying to control the narrative. That's why they're choosing certain outlets, certain press outlets to go to, and yeah, I can see that point too, because like I said, I've interviewed Tom in the past. I've had a good relationship with his people, and I can't get an interview anymore.
Right.
When they were in Austin, I went to the show. I tried to get an interview, and I was told he's not doing interviews this tour. Well, that next thing you know, weeks later, the New York Times runs a piece on him. So they're obviously very selective. And deep down, I know they're supportive of what the UFO community does. I went to the Angels Airwaves show in Austin just 2 weeks ago, and before the show, I went to like the meet and greet. I talked to Tom. I gave him my book, and he's like, he saw punk rock and UFOs. Like, he didn't recognize me or the name, even though he's like seen my work before. But he wanted to talk about Bad Religion. So it's kind of funny. I was like, oh yeah, Bad Religion used to have a T-shirt with like a UFO on it. So it's like, I think they appreciate it. Like at that show, Steve Justice was there too, just like in the crowd. And myself and a guy named Jared, you probably know him on Twitter. Vegan Ron Swanson is his name. High Strangeness.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, we went up to Steve Justice and we talked to him, and he was really cool, really nice guy. And I told him, hey, look, I support of what y'all do. I'm not an investor because as a journalist, that would be a conflict of interest. But, there are people in the UFO community who do support you guys. And he was very appreciative of that. And he's very humble. He was like, first of all, I think he was surprised that people knew who he was, in the crowd. But, I just got a good vibe from that very brief conversation with Steve.
Yeah, it's funny, actually. Some of the first stories I heard about Luis Elizondo actually were from former military folks who were experiencers who we had been talking to, and either to hear their stories or just to kind of get to know them, right? Just become friends. And they would tell us, hey, we saw Elizondo at a conference, at like a UFO event or whatever, and we went and talked to him, and he was super cool, and he was really interested in hearing our stories because we're ex-military. Again, for me, it's actually funny. I think one of the best decisions they ever made was not working with MUFON.
Yeah, I agree.
And staying as far away from those people as possible. A career move I wish that I had also done, frankly. But it's interesting. I mean, I wonder. So for me, and I think for a lot of people too, actually, the big concern with To the Stars Academy and the concern with Bigelow Aerospace, frankly, has been the drive to commercialize space. I don't think, listen, I don't honestly think that To the Stars Academy is going to build a rocket ship.
I think that's a very lofty goal, for sure.
Exactly, right? And I think anyone who honestly believes that they're going to crack alien technology and everything else, I think that's a little bit putting the cart before the horse. The thing I always tell people, even, we were at UFO or Alien Con rather, and there was a booth set up where these people were selling an anti-gravity plan or something, and you could invest, and they were going to do tests and everything else. And in my mind, the thing that I always find so funny with that is, well, you're surrounded by booths that are telling us that we don't even have a good photo of a UFO yet. And you're going to tell me how their engine works? we can't even decide what color gray skin they have, or whatever the hell, if they have skin, if they're even physical beings. But anyways, but for me, it's always been about, or one of my big concerns, I know this is true of my co-host Marie as well, it's been about, Bigelow giving these interviews where he says, NASA has the wrong idea. NASA thinks that if you go out into space belongs to the taxpayer. But that's not true. Space belongs to whoever gets there first. Right? That's very concerning to me, that some guy, some billionaire could get out to space and decide that the resources of space belong to him.
Well,
Yeah,
no, I think the idea of billionaires trying to privatize everything is definitely a fear we should have for everything. I think the idea of him trying to profit off of space, here's the thing, that may eventually lead to wars one day over whose property it is.
Well, it's the storyline to freaking Alien, right? Wayland Court, man. It's like, we know how this story ends. But that's one thing that I kind of wonder with To the Stars Academy, right? If they did, let's say this metamaterial, right? And my listeners know how I feel about this. you know how I feel about this, whatever. But let's just suppose for a moment that it is actually a piece of alien tech, and through its analysis, they discover anti-gravity technology. Do they have an ethical responsibility then to that opens up, if they have anti-gravity technology, that would in theory open up energy to the masses, right? Energy would become freely available in some ways. We would say, the reason that energy is limited right now to the methods that we have is because the best and most efficient way to convert mechanical energy to electrical energy is by a generator. It's magnetism. If they discover a way to convert some kind of energy into gravitational energy or potential energy, that would open up an entire new paradigm in energy generation methodologies.
Yeah.
If they did discover that, do they have an ethical responsibility in your mind to open it up to the public?
Well, I think that's why one of the if you listen to one of the earliest videos that they put out and press conferences, they said this is technology, or what they want to do could potentially change kind of the future and how we operate and do things. So I definitely think that's not something that they're going to hold on to themselves. I think eventually it'll be dispersed. I mean, who knows if they can even crack it, first of all. But
absolutely,
if they have that opportunity. So I want to go backwards for a second. I'm not sure you believe in this story or not, but one of my favorite cases is Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell.
Yep.
And if your listeners aren't too familiar, basically Philip Coswell is someone who claims to be an ex-Pentagon official, and he says in his book his job was to take crashed Roswell tech and disseminate it to companies for them to figure out what it is and how to reverse engineer it. And according to that book, that's why we have such a spike in technology around that era. I think To the Stars is doing the same thing, only they're going to be the ones, if the Academy eventually grows large enough to actually start producing the stuff, or it could kind of do what Corso originally did, then disseminate and sell, I guess, the rights to this to Bigelow or whoever. And as long as that's being used for good rather than bad, I understand the ethical argument of it, but if this can crack the code of clean energy for everyone for free, I think that's a great thing. At some point, no matter who discovers it, somebody's going to try to profit off of it at some point. So who knows? Even if it's them creating, just getting a patent on it and just selling, getting it out there, and then eventually years down the line, some asshole steps in and tries to charge us for it, But I think they're not looking that far ahead. I think they're just looking. Let's see if we can, get to the bottom of this, and then maybe light years from now we'll build that spaceship that we posted.
Yeah. Do you think so? I have this I think is one of the most interesting parts of this story is there are, I would say, the majority of, I guess, what I would consider to be traditional UFO researchers believe that Bigelow is involved in To the Stars Academy. Right? Because it's, it would be like the change of a lifetime for Pudov to be involved in something and not have Bigelow be involved. You know what I mean? Like, that's basically been his career this entire time. And other folks are there too, right? Like, Eric Davis. I mean, obviously he might as well just be an extension of Pudov. They work for the same Earth, their same company and everything else. And they've been kind of a duo since pre-NIDS even. But, do you think Bigelow is involved in To the Stars Academy?
I'm not sure, but I know that there's meetings, and this is documented. This isn't hearsay. Tom was at Bigelow Airspace. Blair Bigelow, Robert Bigelow's daughter, they were all in a photo. It was Blair Bigelow, Tom, and Lou Elizondo. So they were obviously there. Yeah. They obviously had meetings. And you know what? Bigelow Airspace just very well could be one of those companies that they're talking about, that they're in communication with.
Right. Yeah. So just quick, not to nitpick or anything. Blair for listeners is Bigelow's granddaughter.
I'm sorry, granddaughter. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, no, absolutely. Right. That is documented. We know that they at least met, to me, it seems like when this first started coming out with To the Stars Academy, the reason actually I was mostly excited or interested was because I was like, finally another rich guy to make to dilute Bigelow's influence. I was like, that's great. A source of money in this field that isn't Robert Bigelow.
But now that may not be the case.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And right away then when Pudov got on board, I was like, oh shit. Yeah, I was like, here we go again.
Well, like you saw what Bigelow Aerospace tweeted the other day. I mean,
I sure did.
Yeah, and I thought the timing of that was interesting.
Well, and that's the thing too, right? With the release of, like, say, the Wilson docs, even I was kind of thinking. So people assume that the NID story. People assume just from what they've heard with Hunt for the Skinwalker and documentaries and whatever, that NIDS ended amicably. But that's not really the case, right? NIDS broke up with a lot of their some of their researchers coming away from it being very frustrated that they really didn't do anything. They just kind of hung out. There was no direction, all that kind of stuff, right? We have, letters from scientists to researchers saying as much, whatever. And then the group kind of split away. And the ones that remained on board, a lot of them eventually went to the Stars Academy. To me, it's really interesting that. So what I originally thought was maybe this was actually a true schism, that the ones that were, tired of Bigelow went to the Stars, and then Bigelow was still doing his own thing, and that maybe someone within that other group was releasing documents to make To the Stars Academy look bad, like the Wilson doc, like whatever. But now with the Bigelow orb video, it's there was always two ways, right? I knew Bigelow was involved somehow. I just didn't know if I believed that he was involved as a kind of silent, promoter or whatever, or someone they're just working with or talking to, whatever, or if he was actually, just not part of it on purpose. Now I kind of think maybe there still is that second group releasing documents and stuff to make them look or make them scramble, right, to respond to these kind of documents and things. But I don't necessarily know if Bigelow's a part of it anymore. Or that he ever was. I almost now wonder if maybe those are some of those disgruntled, researchers or whatever.
Here's an idea that I just want to float. There's no basis to this, but what if they released that tweet with that orb video? Let's say they're not working with To the Stars, but what if they're, it's almost like friendly competition. What if they see what To the Stars is doing? They know that they've had Bigelow Aerospace has some former colleagues who now work there, and what if Bigelow Aerospace has some stuff up their sleeve too, and they sent out that tweet as a tease saying, "Hey, you know what? We have something too."
Yeah.
I mean, I just this is funny to make this comparison because I was just watching wrestling documentaries, and it's like you're back in the day in wrestling at the Monday Night Wars, WWE versus WCW. It was like a big thing. What if you have something like that with like To the Stars with Bigelow Aerospace? Like that could be kind of cool, like potentially, high profile companies fighting over. Kind of over the same thing. And, what if potentially that could be happening?
Oh, man. And so then what is Stephen Greer's group is NWO then?
Stephen Greer's group's like ECW, I guess.
Oh, is it ECW? Yeah, there we go. He's, the one, the ones throwing tacks on each other and hitting you with nails.
They were basically led by somebody who was like a cult-like leader with Paul Heyman. So there you go.
Oh, badass, dude. Now I'm into it again. This is great news. But, one thing that I've been interested in, or one thing that I think has been a really interesting part of this whole story, has been the response of the older parts of the UFO community to kind of the To the Stars story, it's really been kind of fascinating. And I think part of it is because the UFO community has had a really, if there's one thing the UFO community is really good at doing, I think it's compartmentalizing. And, I don't agree with MUFON's leadership, but I would still consider a lot of MUFON members to be friends, and even some local chapters to be places that I would be willing to like go hang out and speak and do research with, because I know how little it actually means to be part of MUFON. Like it's like being part of I don't even know how to describe it. It's it's a very loose organization, right? It's like working at a McDonald's almost. Like, the individual cashier is not exactly, affected by the decisions of the overall McDonald's board in any necessarily significant way. But, they're just kind of licensing the name, right? So whatever. But anyways, one of the interesting things has been this idea that part of their careful media work, because part of To the Stars Academy's careful media work seems to be bringing on board journalists and people into their fold, right? So, for instance, like Brian Bender or Leslie Keane or George Knapp, Keane and or Knapp, at least we can say for certain, who's had research work done with and through Bigelow in the past. Their involvement has also been a part of this, where people think, well, look, Bigelow must be involved, or they are doing a similar kind of thing that Bigelow did with them, right? But a part of this that's come out too, or part of the idea here, is that there might be, or there's this theory out there, there's this kind of idea that perhaps To the Stars Academy also has a street team, right, of people who are promoting it or trying to get the stories out there or trying to push it. What do you think about that? Do you think it's bullshit?
Because I know how small the operation actually is. It's so when To the Stars first started, before the Academy, it spawned off of some of Tom DeLonge's other companies, which was Really Likable People, which owned Macbeth Footwear, which was his shoe line. And that this was basically before To the Stars even formed. Even back then, it was Tom, his sister, his assistant, and very few people. Like, back in the day when I went to San Diego, I toured the Macbeth studio. I actually met one of the Macbeth guys at South by Southwest, and he's like, "Hey man, if you're ever in San Diego, I'll take you tour the office." And it was very, very small. There's like an arts department. There's a little studio where Angels and Airwaves would record, but like very small operation. He had one publicist, and to this day, even with the Academy, it's those same people. When I was at the Austin show, actually some of those people flew up for it. Tom's assistant was there, assistant/secretary, and I talked to her for a few minutes because we have a mutual friend, his old publicist. So it's still the same people. Tom's sister's his manager; manages the company as well. So it's a very, very small operation. And this idea that they're able, first of all, he's constantly changing publicists too. So if they had this giant PR team, people think, that are secretly trying to influence journalists and have a straight team, I think that's lost on me.
Right.
George Knapp and Leslie Keane, I don't think they have, this access that everyone thinks they do. Yes, obviously they know people involved in To the Stars, and New York Times did, do the stories. And when I spoke to Ralph Blumenthal, who's one of the authors of the first, the first two big stories they did, and one of the questions he said is like, look, our work was independent of To the Stars. We obviously knew what they were doing, but we did our own reporting and research on our own. And I think that's a myth that a lot of people think, that just because there are certain high-profile journalists that, go on record kind of supporting them, I don't think that means that those journalists are bought and paid for. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not.
Yeah, it's like, the way it's actually really funny. I think it's very similar to Bigelow Aerospace, actually, in this way, where there's this idea that Bigelow Aerospace is this really big, high-tech company. And then you read interviews and you find out that Bigelow doesn't even have a computer. He doesn't use a computer. He uses a phone, a dial-up phone still to do his business. And it's like, oh, well, maybe this isn't as maybe this isn't as tech savvy as I thought it was. I honestly think it is funny. One of the things that I always point out when people bring this up to me is just go on Twitter and see the way that people respond to these stories differently. Like the Wilson docs was the perfect example. You had some people saying, "Oh my God, this proves the autopsy document. The autopsy video is real again." And then you had people being like, "That's insane." And then you had people saying, "Well, I don't know what's," and it's like, this much confusion would not have happened if that had been the case.
A lot of those device documents, I always find a middle ground. I'm like, wow, this is interesting. Period. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it's No, absolutely right. One of the best. What's the word? You know, the quote that we always talk about. We always say this on the show, right? From Socrates. The only reason Socrates was the wisest man in Athens was because he knew that he didn't know anything. That is one of the most important things that any of us, especially interested in stuff like this, it's one of the most important things you can do is stay humble and stay what's the word? I don't know, man. Stay having fun with it too. Like this is fun. It should be cool as hell. What just as a kind of some of the last stuff here as we finish up. If you had to pick, if you were talking to somebody they don't believe in this stuff, let's say, and you had to give them one book or one documentary, one piece of media to listen to or to consume, or just even one case to look at that you think is one of the best cases.
Oh man, that's a really tough question.
I know. That's what we ask.
If it was a book, I'd give them Punk Rock and UFOs, True Believers. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm joking. I'm not going to self-plug myself. Honestly, one of the things I did mention in my book is, there's obviously a divide with the UFO community, but there's also a divide between the UFO community and basically kind of like the common populace, right? How do we get these people interested in the subject? So if I was to introduce someone to a book that I think even a skeptic may read it and kind of maybe second guess their beliefs, I would give them The Day After Roswell, the book by Philip Corso, just because, it almost feels like you're reading like a government thriller, but that's what it feels like. But I think there's definitely credible. I think he's credible. And part of that is me being a journalist. When you're involved in journalism, a lot of times you trust titles, right? Titles of authority, government figures as a credible source because their titles lend that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that, these people are infallible of anything. No, absolutely not. But them as a source is a good source.
Sure.
So I would point people to that book just because it's a really fascinating story where people can draw their own, decisions and look, you know what, there was this hike in technology from this period to this period. Maybe it was from this crash material, and maybe this guy did disperse this to private corporations and companies. So I think that's a pretty good book. It's not, quote unquote, too far out there in terms of, because I know in this field, a lot of the stuff I read is a lot of the quote unquote weirder stuff. I really like the consciousness and the spirituality aspect of it as well, and the mythology parts of it too. But I think for the average person, that may not fly. I think you may have to kind of start them off with something a little bit more nuts and bolts.
Right. So actually, that actually leads me perfectly to my next question, which is on that divide between kind of the materialist and the metaphysical, let's say, side. Where do you find yourself? Do you tend to believe the more metaphysical side, or do you think that this is? Do you think do you think we could ever get a crashed ship? Do you think that this is a material thing?
I think it's a material thing, but I also think the older I get, the more I tend to think that the reason why we haven't cracked all these codes is because our thinking is wrong. And this, traditional science is great, and it gives us everything we have, but I think the people that are breaking free from that traditional science, that's the areas you need to go. And I know there's been, some CIA work and everything kind of done in the past, like, really, secretive, but I think that's the type of direction we need to be going is, I really believe in it. And this sounds crazy to a lot of people, especially someone who's very logically minded like you are. But I really think, the more I read and the more I draw my own conclusions, I really think that the key is in us. I think our consciousness plays a huge role in this. And I think that if we could tap into these abilities that are already in our brain and in our bodies, that we may be able to discover some of these mysteries and crack these codes that could help better humanity. Absolutely. And I know that's that's not the easiest point to make to the average person too.
Well, what's funny actually is I almost think that it might be easier in some weird way. Because let me step back here quickly, right? So one of the parts of this I think is really important that we don't really talk about all that often is just how easily your brain is tricked into thinking things and seeing things. And And that doesn't say anything about the reality of the event itself, you know? But people are wrong about their perceptions and memories all the time. I mean, you can get mugged by a guy with a scar over the eye and, a hook for a hand and stuff, and you might remember it as some guy without anything on his, you know what I mean? You just misremember things, and especially in moments of trauma, which any kind of experience like this would almost necessarily be traumatic. To me, a fundamental part of this that I think the UFO community, and we always argue for it on our show, and it's what we talked about when we were at MUFON and everything else, is really, I think, part of the fundamental understanding of this has to be, how do we cognate as a people? Because people don't think the same ways. I often will ask people on the show this question: when you have a thought, right? If I tell you to think about a red ball, how does your brain, what in your mind's eye, if you even have a mind's eye, right? That's an assumption all of its own. If I tell you to think about a red ball, how are you doing that thought process? What does it feel like or look like in your head?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I kind of covered in my books, our process of belief, what we kind of choose to believe in and rebel against.
Absolutely.
And, there's psychological, reasonings behind this as well. But ultimately, it goes down to, how open-minded are we to possibilities that go against what we're previously taught and how we previously think.
Well, I think it's important as well to just understand that people have different cognitive methods and functions. Not one brain operates the same way necessarily, and not one thought process operates the same way necessarily. And so I think that it's something that we need to be more open to talking about, because, currently the way that your brain thinks is it obviously is a very personal thing, but it really is not, it's not something that we all share in common. And you don't realize it until you have a weird experience like this, or you have a discussion with somebody that gets into really nitty gritty consciousness stuff. And suddenly you realize, oh my God, that's not a normal way to think. That's not a normal way of cognating. So anyways, so you think though that this is a physical phenomena, but that our conscious mind does play some part. So kind of like again, in a middle position, right? Which is a very sensible position to take.
A UFO is a physical machine. It's not nothing in our head. I think it's something made out of nuts and bolts, materials. But I think the key to communication, the key to, I'm trying to how to word this. I think our consciousness is basically the key to it, because if you think about it, if you're any abduction or regression cases, it's all takes place and it's all hidden in your consciousness. And I believe that's the window. That's how they get us, quote unquote. They get us through our consciousness, because just through centuries, we've evolved into this, where we are now, where, there's, I guess, that part of our brain is very, if you go back to the Egyptians' belief of the third eye and all these powers, many of these windows hold forth there, and, that we blocked it, we block these abilities through, whether it's, I don't know, evolution, or just through our own, kind of what we tend to believe and do. For some reason there's that barrier. And one of the recent interviews I did, I interviewed the guy who wrote the book called The Spirit Molecule, Dr. Rick Strassman, who studied the effects of DMT. And you hear these crazy cases, sure. And it's like, I think there's something there. I think that's a window to something, whether it's another dimension, another galaxy, universe. But we're traveling through it, not physically, but through our consciousness. And this is something I brought up in my first book, and it was just an idea. What if when we die, this isn't my idea. Other doctors, Dr. Robert Lanza, he floated this idea too. But, our consciousness stays with us. And then I took that idea and I said, well, what if our consciousness is our souls? And when we die, when we go to quote unquote heaven, we're really not going to heaven in a biblical sense, but we're traveling to these parts of the galaxy, these parts of the universe that we can't physically get into now.
Yeah, man. It's, I don't know. I just keep saying, I'm just waiting for, what's his face? I'm just waiting for Zuckerberg to figure out how to upload an AI, upload my brain to a robot, and I'll be happy.
That's going to happen dude. Soon, probably.
If I can live long enough to see a good Batman movie made with the Riddler and Mad Hatter, I'll be happy.
Hopefully it's coming soon. hopefully Jonah Hill for the Riddler.
Oh, dude, that'd be so good. Oh my god. So good. Anyways, well, Mike, thank you again so much for coming on, man. It was a real treat. I'm so happy we're finally able to do this. Listeners, again, this was Mike Damante, Punk Rock and UFOs. Go check it out. Buy the books, read them, check out his Twitter feed, check out his website. Anything else, Mike, you want people to know or hear about?
No, that's it. Thanks again for having me on. Like I said, I featured you in my book, and I've been looking forward to being on your show. I'm glad we're finally able to make this work. And this is probably one of the best podcasts I've done. Great questions and great discussion. So thank you.
Thanks, man. We try. Yeah, man. We got to have you on again sometime soon for sure.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll talk hockey. We'll do New York Rangers and Aliens special. I don't know.
Yeah, man. We got maybe that's the help we need, the spark we finally need. Right? We'll get some alien technology going. Oh my God. Oh, now I'm sad. Now I got to spend the rest of my Saturday worrying about the Rangers, my dude. Oh, rough times. All right, sweet. Thank you again, dear listeners, and we will be back next week. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at Mad Scientist Pod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.